We're live. It is 6:58. I'm even early by a couple of minutes. One of the things, unfortunately, you guys probably can't see unless you really zoom in to the thumbnail, which is my my good buddy Mark Sanchez posing for the probably 100th time or something as the lead photo for many magazine stories. He's been in a ton. He's been doing it a really long time, and you can see I was going to say it's hard for you to probably see on such a small photo on the thumbnail photo, but you can see the dismay on his face. It's like, really, hurry up, take a picture. But what he's doing is he is actually in his element because he's working on a big block Ford, although it's not a 429, which would definitely be his preference. So shout out to Marky. It is a 460, so it's the lesser of the big block Fords, because everybody knows that the 429, certainly if you talk to Mark, everybody knows the 429 is like way better in every way, shape, or form. It's way better than the 460. So we can leave that for another argument for another time on what happens with the displacement and stuff, and that 429s like to rev and all that stuff. So that's another, we've gone over that many times with rod ratio and golf ball dimples and all kinds of stuff. But the question for tonight is, as you can see in the photo, he is bolting on a Dominator carburetor. It's a big block Ford. It is a pretty decent one, if I remember right. This started out as your basic thing, and then we did a bunch of like small cam, stock head, mildly ported stock heads, intake manifolds, and carburetors and things on it, and ended up with a fairly good set of ported heads from the guys at MPG and Cam Research Corp, and a good camshaft in it, a good flat tapping camshaft in it. I think it was a flat tapping cam, and like 10-1 or something, and it made over 600 horsepower. But it did, and with a Dominator carburetor. And so we know that we can make lots of power. We know that carburetor, I think that one was a 1050. We know that it will support lots of power. In fact, I used a Dominator on my Engine Masters motor, which was 410 inches, small block Ford, if I remember right. But I used a 750 Dominator, and because we use an adapter, thinking back now, if there was I used a dual plane on mine. That's why we had to use the adapter. That's right. I was thinking if there was a single plane because we tried using a single plane, but if there would have been a single plane that was a Dominator single plane, I definitely would have used that, because every time I've tested that seems to work out better. And I don't know if it's because we've spread the carburetor out closer to the ports or something, but they seem to like that better. But the question is, if we're running a Dominator carburetor on this kind of application, I would use it because it makes more power, and that was a fairly racy kind of piece anyway. So you could certainly have that in your car, but it would have to have a fairly high idle if it was a stick car, or it would have to have some converter and gear for you to want to work it right. And like I said, it made a lot of power. But what about the drivability? What about driving around on a Dominator carburetor? What do you guys think about that? What do you think about the drivability for either a 2-circuit or a 3-circuit Dominator? I know Brule has had pretty good luck doing tuning with some of those, and obviously a lot of that's going to be a function of what size motor it is and what state of tune it's in. If it's a big block, and the smaller it is, the worse this is going to be. But if it's a big block and it has, it's going to be worse if it's a small block. If you're trying to put this kind of carburetor on a 260-inch or 220-inch small block Ford, it's probably not going to work all that well. But on a 460 or 560-inch big block, something that has a 286, 290 camshaft in, or 300 camshaft in it, where that carburetor is going to shine and make lots of power, that's going to work really well. That combination by itself is not going to be ideal for driving around. But what about if you put together a big block like a 540? Because, I mean, who would build a 454 anymore? You'd build at least a 496. And if you had the bore size available to you in an aftermarket block, you'd build something bigger than that. Because the nice thing about building a bigger motor is that you can build it bigger, and that the camshaft that you would use in the smaller motor would be much tamer in the bigger motor. And so you'd have better drivability, you'd have more torque, you'd have all sorts of good things. But could you successfully run a Dominator carburetor on that? So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Can you run a Dominator carburetor on a street? I think more guys are doing it now because more guys are building big motors. If you were building a 396, especially a high strung 396, you might not want that carburetor on there. But a 496 or a 596, that would be a different thing. I think you could get away with a lot of carburation on there. I don't know that you'd go to two of them on some it would make power, because every time we run that combination, it definitely picks up power, even though one carburetor can make an awful lot. Two of them are just better. It's certainly a lot more money when we do that. So the question is, how is the drivability going to be on a big carburetor like that for the street? And then the second question is, can we improve upon that if we go to, and we'll talk about both of these things. So if we go to instead of replacing the carburetor, if we go to like these 4-hole 4500 series, EFI setups, I think probably Holley makes some, Sniper or Terminator, some kind of thing. I don't know what they've named it, but that sort of thing is available. So the benefit of that as opposed to having a Dominator carburetor is that you could control the amount of fuel. And the way I always explain it is that when you have a motor and you have a carburetor on it, the signal from the motor is requesting fuel from the carburetor. And the amount that it's supplied by the carburetor is a function of the jetting and the metering blocks and all that stuff. So, but the thing is, the motor demand is kind of determining that. Obviously, you're altering how much of that with jetting and stuff. But you can never do, especially the bigger the carburetor, the more problematic this can become. You can never do individual tuning and, I want to take away, half an airfield point or a full airfield point at 2,800 RPM, and then everywhere else it's fine, or it's not, and I want to take it away somewhere else or add it somewhere else. Can I do that? It's very, very tricky to do with a carburetor. I've not seen anybody successfully do that without it having an effect somewhere else. Maybe they can on an individual thing. But the nice thing about fuel injection is if we put a 4-hole throttle body or port injection on any motor, we can do that with any motor, with any combination. We can where the carburetor, where the motor is asking the carburetor to supply fuel, with fuel injection, you're telling it. You're telling it you're going to supply this much fuel. I don't care what's happening to the signal. I don't care what RPM is. I don't care what the load is. I'm going to determine how much fuel you're supplying. So the nice thing about that is you can then go in and have the right air fuel, regardless of how cantankerous the thing wants to be with, cam timing and displacement and to some extent throttle opening, although that becomes less of a problem with fuel injection, because again, the throttle opening and signal are manifesting themselves into having some kind of fuel flow. But that's a nice thing about fuel injection is, and if the 4-hole stuff works I haven't tested the big 4-hole stuff, and I haven't maybe 100% successfully tested the 4150 stuff either, but in theory, you should be able to do that. So then how does that compare to port injection? So let's say we have individual ports. We have an injector in each one of the ports. Let's say we have a single plane manifold, same manifold, and this is very common. So we have individual injectors, one in each one of the ports. We've got fuel rails. And then instead of having a throttle body that has injectors in it, we just have a 4-hole throttle body. It's just 4 valves, basically. Or maybe a big mono blade or maybe 2 oval blades, or whatever the configuration is. It has enough airflow to support the power level. The blades are big enough, whatever configuration they're in. And then you have fuel being injected into the individual ports. So what's the upside of that? Well, the upside of that is potentially, because the injectors are not in the way, you can get more airflow from the throttle body, possibly. But the real thing is that you can individually tune cylinders, which you can't do with a carburetor and you can't do with a 4-hole throttle body. Because even though you can adjust air fuel in a given RPM range, you can do that as a conglomerate of each side, let's say. So if you're taking an O2 reading from one header or from the other header, and you say, okay, it's lean at this RPM and rich at this RPM, you can go in and tailor that. But that doesn't tell you anything about what the individual cylinders are doing, let alone you having any ability to adjust them individually, especially if they're going in a common plenum like that. Sometimes we do that we'll do that. And it's much easier to do that actually with a tunnel ram and multiple carburetors. Then we can kind of corner jet it and at least get, you can do that a little bit and get the cylinder to cylinder balance a little bit better, but not always at all RPM ranges. So if you if you can get it right in the critical areas where it's making power or where it's running at, then a lot of times that can be done. With injection, you certainly, like if you put the 4500 throttle body injectors on top of there, you could do that to some extent, and then also do it with RPM. But with port injection, you could have it be right everywhere under all circumstances. There is, however, a downside to running port injection, and that is that you don't get charge cooling. So even though your air fuel might be right, which can be beneficial, usually more for safety, at least in my testing, I've done individual cylinder trims and not gained very much power, but some of them were so lean that I was worried about the safety of the motor. I mean, if you have one cylinder that's 12.8 and the other one's 13.8 or 14.8 at wide open throttle on an NA motor, I would start to worry about that, especially if you did that for any length of time. That would be problematic. And the other thing that happens is, and we see this a lot with carburetors, but also with fuel injection, is that you'll see changes in the distribution at different RPMs. So the cylinders that might be lean at the bottom, maybe rich at the top, and all of this stuff can go away. The cool thing about individual cylinder trim is that you can adjust that, but you don't have the charge cooling that either one of the other setups have. Now, guys can bicker back and forth about which one of those offers more charge cooling based on, you know, droplet size and all of that. And again, you're getting into the picking nits over here for that, I think. But both of those will provide some form of charge cooling because you have fuel being distributed into the common plenum. Whereas with port injection, you have it being dumped down near the cylinder head. There's less time for charge cooling and less takes place. And every time I've tested a carburetor versus port injection on the same intake manifold, the carburetor has made more power, even with our ability to go and adjust it individually. So we always have a trade-off. With port injection, we might not make as much power, but it'd be safe, and we'd be able to get the kind of distribution that we want on every RPM and load and all that stuff. So we're trading. Would we trade one of those for the other? With the throttle body, 4-hole throttle body injection, where the injector is going into the same, with fuel going in the same spot that it does with a carburetor, we have some of the cooling, if not all of the cooling and power potential of the carburetor, assuming that the throttle body is working correctly. And we have adjustability with that, but we don't have individual cylinder adjustability. So we get rid of that. And the carburetor, we have the demand for fuel being created by the engine rather than the other way around. Although we can adjust the carburetor to some extent to get the demand and the supply hopefully in line. And obviously people have been doing that successfully for a long time. I mean, NASCAR, I think was probably the best example. They're doing fuel injection now, but when they weren't, they're out there running, 500 miles at 9,000 RPM. And they were doing it with carburetors and doing it very successfully and making it work and making lots of power and making it live. So all of those things are, getting one of those things right is really good, but getting all of the things right is they're obviously showing that it did work, and they're making it work with fuel injection as well too. So unfortunately, which is always what people want. Well, what's the best one? Well, you get to choose. All I can do is tell you what they all do, at least give you a fairly good idea. And then ultimately you're going to have to choose. I can't tell you one's better than the other. I can tell you which one I probably would use for a given application, and then tell you why I would pick that. But again, in some cases, like I might not use the 4-hole throttle body because I haven't had success with them. Maybe people have, and maybe I'm just biased. That's altogether possible. But I've had really good success with, if I'm running a carbureted style intake manifold with port injection and a 4-hole throttle body and blowing through that works really well. And quite honestly, with boost, if we gave up, and I would always run an intercooler anyway and good fuel like E85. So I think that running E85 in port injection might negate some of the gains that you would get from introducing the fuel above the carburetor, because maybe we're getting some of what would be there. And then with the intercooler, we're also starting out with a cold air temperature. So are we getting as big a gain? All of those things, could be discussed. So there are reasons why I would do some of the things that I would do. But again, it ultimately, it's going to come down to people are going to have discussions about that. Well, what about this? Or what about this? What about that? Yes, all of that is true. And in the end, you're going to have to decide which one of those things do I want to trade for which one of those things. And then you're going to make your decision accordingly. Let's see what you guys have going on tonight. I'm going to scroll back, scroll in. Keep those doggies scrolling. We are live. Milo got his haircut today, so he's all happy. Did you see where Cletus blew the transmission up in the giveaway truck? I did not see that. Was he doing burnouts? Good evening. Is GT35 a good size for a 292? Yes, that should work good. 429 will like the Dominator. I weighed the pistons and rods out of my 383 versus my 327, and the 383 was way lighter, almost half the weight of the 327 stuff. Surprising. Was the 327, was it a 365 horse 327, like with a big dome on it? Because those are not light pistons. The 385 seemed to love to be over-carbed. Getaway's feeling better today. That's good. So I'm switching chassis, found some frame rust that would require major work on my Colorado. So picked up a Ranger. That'll be good. Twin turbo, no prep. I did it on the street on a 2-circuit Dominator on 460. I think Brule likes the 2-circuit stuff better than he likes the 3-circuit stuff. I mean, drivability would be fine for guys like us, but not for the average person. Well, not for somebody that never looks under the hood or anything like that. But for guys that have had, like I've had 3 side drafts, for that kind of stuff, that's, there are workarounds. Richard, would you prefer an overbore 383 or a 383 stroker? What do you mean? You mean one that has stroke or one that has bore? How are we going to create a 383 with bore? Which engine family are you talking about? Yes, to a Dominator on the street. Holly 1,000 horsepower 4150 is great driving carb. Hard low. Oh, for low RPM Dominators. Yeah, we've run the 1,000 4150 on a lot of stuff, but the manifolds for the 4500s tend to be better. So my G8 has a serious misfire issue. Clean the MAF, new plugs, narrowed it down to O2 sensors, hauls the mail with wide open throttle, but misses at idle. O2s have 100,000 miles. Just order new ones. Are you getting? James? Are you monitoring the O2 readings? Like, are you getting weird O2 readings? And is the O2 seeing the misfire, or is it causing the misfire? I had a 400-ish horsepower high revving 350, and the formula said 600 CFM. I ran 1,000,000 Holley carbs on it, and the bigger the better was always the biggest I had was an 850. Yeah, for 400 horsepower, I wouldn't run a 600. We'd at least run a 650, and if it was a 350, I probably would have run it with a 750 on the engine dyno anyway. Did you wet sand the Omni? I don't have the Omni here, so I'm not doing that. I think that they might be taking it all the way down. My LS 3-bolt throttle body on a stock K24A2 was a bit of a transition nightmare. how big is that throttle? How big? That's a 78 millimeter. I think mine was a 65 on the Honda. James, have you identified which cylinder is missing? That's always good because then you can swap stuff around and see. We do that on the dyno. If we have a dead hole, we can, you would start by doing all the things, a plug, a wire, changing it. The easy way is you could swap plugs to another. If we don't have another plug, which we normally do, is just put a new one in and see if it does anything, and then put the new one back in the cabinet if it didn't do anything, because we know that it's not that. Or a plug wire, but you can also swap them and go, okay, look, let's put these over here, and is that hole dead now? Then it's that thing. That's a pretty easy way to diagnose that stuff. I'm sure James has done that stuff. Yeah, Carl loved it. Come on, you got to hit the like button. We saw lots of broken valve springs causing misfire. I've seen that before. Parts store will rent diodes for the injectors and the drop tool. We have the injector nodes. Let's make sure that they're firing. This live session is catered to me, going through the exact mind bender right now with my 557 Ford. Definitely Dominator for that. AFR 315 heads. AFR intake came with a 1250 quick fuel, 4500. Drivability doubtful. I think it would be okay on that. I think it's going to depend more on your camshaft. 1250 is pretty good size. It doesn't misfire once the O2s heat up and close loop. And there's no leak anywhere, no exhaust leak. If they're taking longer to heat up, they could be going bad. Just chilling in Tahoe. I used to live up there. Went to South Tahoe Middle School and South Tahoe High for a while. And I lived up there when I was little too. We lived in the Keys. Had a boat, just run and go jump in the boat in the Keys and drive it out like we were somebody. It was a ratty old 17-foot fiberglass boat with a 75 horse McCullough on it, but we could ski behind it. Almost forgot to switch to live chat. I am on top chat. I need to make that my default. Twin Dominators are even better. Doing a Tomaran Big K 671 460 with TFS. The TFS heads are nice. I really, the one that I made a lot of power with had those heads on it, and they were really good. Love your videos. Thanks for motivating me to get my 496 with my Gen 4. Just waiting on parts. Yeah, that happens. And do you have a 71 Camaro? Because I really like those. Mine was a 70 and a half. My first one. I like those. What do you think about 20-degree heads on something like a 565 big block, too little displacement for 400 CFM? No, that's not too little displacement. 400 CFM. Think about an LS. We have LS heads that are 400 CFM, and those motors aren't 565 inches. When would annular boosters work best? That's actually a test I want to do. I'd like to see. I need to get a carburetor that would allow me to run different boosters in it. I have a 72 millimeter for my 3.8 Buick, and it seems so tiny compared to the LS stuff. A 72 millimeter turbo or a 72 millimeter throttle body? Any boat that gets you on the water. We had to paddle it home more than once. We got towed back a couple of times, but it was it's cool. It's really cool when you're at Tahoe and you're skiing, and because the water's so clear, you're skiing over, you can see everything on the bottom, and you go out and make your turns and stuff and come back in, and on the clear spot, obviously when you're not destroying the water, is you can see like logs and rocks and fish swimming by, flipping you off and stuff. Would you prefer one large 4-barrel or two smaller 4-barrels? Well, those would require different intake manifolds, so that wouldn't be about the carburetor change. Christmas Valley, Myers area. Yep, been snowing all day. My brother lives up there. Not in Myers. He lives. Oh no, actually, he would be by Myers. Bank 2 is wonky. That's got to be an Ellis technical term, right? 71 Mulsanne blue with black stripes. Very nice. Is it it's not a Z28, is it? Is it a Rally Sport? Is it an SS? You think stock bottom end 5.3 LS with ring gap, of course, handles some twin 76 millimeter turbos with a shot nitrous with a Holley high ram and a nitrous plate plus a tick performance heat exchanger. So do you need all that? Would be my first question. 2 real 76 millimeter turbos is 2,000 horsepower. And then you add nitrous on top of that. Do you need that? The new Edelbrock. Might be able to swap boosters. Because I think Westech has those Edelbrock carburetors there now. We do need a pole. So the pole is going to be... And we'll even make it a street strip motor. Okay, would you run a Dominator carb on your street strip motor? Let's see what people have to say. Shows the dogs. That's Milo's on guard duty. He just wants to show off because he got all cleaned and stuff today. Throttle body on the Buick. Is it the 3800? Because that's more than enough throttle body for a Buick. Well, not on a draw. If it's not on a draw through, is it still supercharged or is it turbocharged? I can't remember. Twin Dominators. The only thing that looks better than a Dominator on a big single 4-barrel is that when you have 2 of them on a tunnel ram. 557 Ford has the same cam and the 895 build you did. Comp cams 275, 284. That's a good camshaft. Headers feeding fabricated 2 1/8. So that thing probably makes really good power. 895. That's good. George, what question did I miss? I will scroll back and see. Aaron. Oh, the new Edelbrock. Okay. George, I'm trying to find it. And I'm scrolling. Keep that Milo scrolling. George, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. I've gone back pretty far. Oh, here we go. What do you think about my power torque would be on an NA LS3, 236, 246? ITBs. That's the only thing I don't know about, George. Take a look at the one that I did that was 600 horsepower would be like that. So I'm guessing if it has enough compression that it could be there. .53 bore with a 4-inch stroke. So you're going to keep the stock stroke in it? James, maybe the tune fell out of it. I love it. People come into West Tech and say that. I think the tune fell out of it. Well, where did you sweep it up? Did you get it? Oh, a 250 horse 327. So that's not going to have those pistons in it. So far my experiment with my buddy Jimmy doing day trading is working out pretty well. I've been up every day so far, so I'm fingers crossed. Oh, and for future reference, those that might be swapping LQ9 pistons and rods onto an LQ4 crank, there's only 0.8 grams front balance difference and 1.2 gram rear balance difference on the crank. That's not enough to even do. Yeah, the LS3 bolt is 78 millimeters. The stock one is. I'd like to see a shootout between a 383 small block Chevy and a 383 Mopar. So you're trying to make them the same, is what you're trying. That's the goal of this. Because the motor doesn't care whose name's on the valve cover. So if it has that displacement and they have the same compression and they have the same camshaft and the same head flow, I think they're going to be pretty close on power. And I scrolled back quite a ways. Was your 70.5 a split bumper? Yes, it was. It was a split bumper Rally Sport, although a base engine, a 2-barrel engine. Francisco's here. I'm scrolling back down. I'm catching up. Big fun, especially when you're doing good. I just like it that it's new and different, and I'm learning, and it's cool to be able to make mistakes, and not because we're just paper trading right now. So it's fun to be able to make mistakes and not have to worry about it. I have 2 Pro System 780s in my Pontiac. Nice. My property is 4.25 acres of unincorporated desert, cactus, and all. What state is that in? And does it have snakes? Paid to have a balance and recommendations, but almost everyone had to have it done to find out completely not necessary. Head crank polish as well. It's better to know though. That's like doing ring gap. You might not need it, but it's or it might have been okay, but you didn't know that until you checked it. It's it's like the Schrodinger's cat. We're talking about Q-jets again. So, would you run a Dominator carb on your street strip motor? 80% are saying yes. So that's really the new 100, right? According to Steve Dulcich, the 383 is the best motor ever made. Southern Nevada. Okay. So like in the Vegas area? No, John, we appreciate it. That's good. Everybody has asked me about doing Gen 4 stuff on the 5.3 stuff is the thing that they're most concerned with. Doing the 5.3 stuff. And I wanted to go down and get with Derek at L&R and find out what the weight differences are and see. Because the pistons and rods are definitely different. And so I was curious to see. And I was curious to see what the weight difference is of the Gen 4 crank, especially if it has a 58X, although no, some of the 5.3s will have 58X stuff. So if it's a 58X crank with that wheel, how much different is that than a 24X crank with that wheel? And then how much are the wheels different? And then how much are the rods different? And then how much are the pistons different? So I'm curious about all that stuff. The Q-jets work really well. You can tune them just like every other carburetor to do the things that you want them to do. Not the Turbo 440. No, I don't think so. Half a gram, that's about as good as it gets you. About 40 miles from Vegas. We lived in Henderson when I lived out there. I ran a Holly Pro Ram tunnel ram with two 1050s on a 427. Ran decent on the street. Amazing throttle response. How many oil drops make a half a gram exactly? Richard, according to the machine shop, rods are heavier, but the pistons are lighter, and it comes out to basically within a gram. On the 5.3 stuff? Dave, Mopar big block rods are balanced within a half a pound. It's good enough. I was amazed at how much the rotating assembly weighed on. I remember Brule telling me about the Hemi. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that they were ever able to rev those things. Oh, on the 6 liter, yeah, on the 6 liter, I think the 5.3 is more than that. I think the 5.3 is getting closer to where you would start to think about it being a necessity or not. But I want to check it and see. My buddy Kevin found a 396 and 440 in his dad's basement. Lots of old school straight 6 stuff. Can't wait for spring. Nice. Is there an issue with running one turbo off one side of a V8? No, I tried it on a big block, but I wasn't successful. But it wasn't the most ideal exhaust setup. And it wasn't the ideal turbo choice. And so we couldn't really make any boost. We couldn't make more than 1 pound. But it's doable, and Saab used to do it on their production cars, on their V6s. And engine builder of the 557 recommended a Speedmaster Dual 4150 intake. Dual carb or TBI. Is he recommending a tunnel ram or just a dual quad thing? .446 spec rods are heavy. It's all fun and games, so you start buying Mallory. That's not cheap. That's what I want to make pellets out of. Mallory or tungsten or depleted uranium, for when you're hunting big game with your pellet gun. Back when kart was around, they ran single-sided turbos at super speedways. Why would they have done that? Big block Chevy 496, 238, 238. Single pattern. Edelbrock Reformer, RPM, oval port heads, air gap. Estimate my build. So what compression is? It's an Edelbrock Reformer RPM oval port head. 496. I don't know. 528. Thing I don't know about is that camshaft. I don't ever remember running a single pattern camshaft on there. So how do I pronounce it? Kiekhofer? Kiekhofer rods for Big Bush Chevy? 111 grams. I was thinking ounces. I only gets within 2 grams. half a gram would be a lot. That would really literally be oil weight. Having a rifle pellet gun helps. Yeah, but we need impact energy. Just a dual quad intake, open plenum. The car is a 79 Continental. Concerned with drivability. Then I would look at a dual plane. Then hopefully it's not just an open plenum. This might have that. Let's see. Hard for me to tell. So I'll have to take a look. What model is this? This is a Gamo Big Cat 1250 feet per second, but only with PBA Platinums, though. It does look like there's rifling in there. I'm going to have to take a look at that and see. 1,250 feet per second. Still, I would think that 11,000 RPMs, that even a half a gram would be a lot on a crank. It's not going to be a lot because you're going to have more oil than that. You're going to have more uneven oil on the crankshaft than that. Shooting wasps from 30 feet away, blindfolded, backward, on the draw. I'm gonna get in trouble for showing a pellet gun. The dual carb intake is just an open hog with short mismatch runner. Yeah, it's probably not a good idea. A single 4-barrel for that, or a dual plane would probably be better. Let's see here. I sat there with a hand file balancing my pistons and rods because I had nothing better to do and got them within 1/10 of a gram. If you trust my cheap Amazon scale. 2.4 Holley EFI Stealth 4500 on a K24. I never heard of an Annihilator BB gun. Shoots 3,000 BBs per minute. What the heck is that? Richard, have you tested anything gravity fed? You mean like the fuel balls that are gravity fed? I don't think so. I think all of the stuff has been pressurized. Yeah, this one I think has a rifle barrel. It's just dark. It's hard to see. It is very accurate because we've sighted it in. It works really good. Your lawnmower's gravity fed. I take it back. The Trail 90's gravity fed. I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, it has to be, because that was one of the problems we were talking about with getting it to be pressurized. So we're gonna have to pressurize the fuel feed. So how is our poll doing? Would you run a Dominator carb on your street trip motor? 76% saying yes, 24% saying no. The old BB guns that used to run off a can of Freon. I don't think I've ever tried those. Should make a video on how much power you can gain with a length of hose. You mean feeding the gravity fed thing? So we put it up farther and get more pressure going to it? Four feet of hose versus 8 feet of hose to gravity feed the engine. So you just what is it you're gravity feeding? Are you feeding right into the motor, or you're feeding into the carburetor? Because if you're feeding into the carburetor and it's not going to change the power output. If it has a fuel bowl, all you're doing is refilling the fuel bowl, right? I'm doing my first else build and got Matt's best cam. Want to trade some upper horsepower for some low end torque. I don't know about advancing that cam. Would the Freon stuff be like a CO2? Is vacuum assist from the distributor? It would be from the carb to the distributor, but yeah, it's a good idea for cruise. My airsoft guns will run on Freon, propane. Always want to run an original 4575, the choke equipped Dominator on a street car. The carbs are out there, but the chokes are long gone and no one makes parts for them. We're going to do something new. 4 more minutes. So how many is that in? How many is that in Richard minutes? How's our poll doing? We're down. We're down to 75%. All the no's are creeping in. All the negativity. Man, why you got to be so negative? Sean, did you mean that it's the bee's knees? Just running a richer circuit instead of having a choke. I still want to do the supercharger on that. Although it's pretty cold now to be riding a Trail 90, but I still want to do a supercharger on that. Oxyacetylene powered potato guns. Yeah. Richard, did you see the boat engine photos I tagged you on Instagram? I didn't. They all had the wrong rod ratios. I'll have to check that out. Any tests with a 671 blower and 4-inch spacer under it? A 4-inch spacer? You mean under the blower or under the carburetor? what would you recommend on a 496 stroke Pontiac with a 671, 8.5 to 1 with more boost, or 10 to 1 with less boost on race fuel? I hope you'd be running race fuel on all of them so you could get the maximum amount of power that you want out of it. But what is it you're trying to do? Are you trying to make more power? If it's more power and you want to run like you're racing it or whatever, then you want more compression and you want more boost. Oh, so you're talking about your firing position? Richard, I'm building a 400 small block Chevy, standard bore, flat top. You have a standard bore 400? That's probably pretty rare anymore. Flat tops, AFR 195s, air gap, 750. You want to run mechanical flat top it on 108 or 110. Well, the camshaft that you pick for that is just going to help you determine like what kind of power output you want. Do you want a cam that's a 236, 242, or 242, 248, or do you want one that's 218, 224? And the lift is going to be whatever cams are available for that. It's going to be, I think, low to mid 500s probably. And is this a flat? Oh, it's a flat tap it. So it is probably going to be lower lift then. Man, it's been a long time since I looked up a flat tappet camshaft. Wow, those are all going to be low lift cams. Those are all in the 400s. Unless you did something. No, even those are going to be. Maybe you put a different rocker on it. I don't know if they have any other grinds. They probably do. Ooh, factory muscle. Maybe one of the XFI cams. Excellent mid-range. Oh, those are wide LSAs, so you want a tighter one. It sounds like you're going to do a custom cam anyways. So is this going to be a driver or what is it? It's a 400 small block. You get away with a pretty good sized camshaft. Let's make some power. Let's say it's a 236, 242 at 50. And then the lift is probably going to be in the low 500s. Boat engine as in like a room of engine? Under the blower. So why are you putting a spacer under the blower? Does it? I hope in that spacer you're putting an intercooler in there too. So if I put my secondaries as far up as possible, is that better for atomization? How are you changing your? Maybe I didn't see what you're talking about. How are you changing your secondaries? Scrolling back, I don't see anything. Not really understanding how you're moving the secondaries on a carburetor. So if let's see, around 110 octane race fuel now, and I could go higher. I could switch to 85 and just run 8.5 to 1 compression now with about 8 pounds of boost. If you're running 110 octane, then 8.5 to 1 and 8 pounds of boost is nothing. You could run like full factory timing with that. I would definitely, if you don't mind running that fuel, or you're running E85, especially if you run E85, if this is that blower motor that you're talking about and you got E85 carburetors, you're going to get a lot of charge cooling. You could run 8 pounds of boost with 10 to 1, or you could run 10 pounds of boost with 10 to 1, and it would run just fine. So split duration would be best. That's what I would use for that cam that he was talking about. I wouldn't run a dual. I wouldn't run a single pattern. A single pattern might drive a little better, but it's going to make less power. No intercooler, but I saw that they made a 4-inch. Just wondering if it makes a difference, like when you put a spacer under the carburetor. It's not going to do the same thing the spacer does under the carburetor. I don't know why they're adding plenum volume under the blower. I don't think that plenum volume is going to do very much on that blower, on that lower manifold. I've honestly never tested volume there. I've only put intercoolers and not intercoolers there, but I've never tested one that's just open. I can't figure out how that would be beneficial. I don't know why more expansion room would be helpful. Richard, I have an 0453 flat top 706 stage 2, but it's not for turbo. I was installing a single key turbo. Will that work? Yeah, you can run that setup with a single turbo if that's what your question is. You're adding a spacer, I'd want to add runner length. The spacer, if it wasn't adding an intercore. The spacer won't add runner length. That's just a spacer. The runner length has to come up from the intake manifold. EFI, sorry, building the dang intake plenum is still in order. Other siblings, wonder if I should run side by side or top and bottom. Tops will be under heavy boost, E85 and M1. Where are the injectors? Are they in the plenum or are they in the runner? With more room or volume, help with air temperatures in the intake manifold. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if you ran the blower at the same pressure, if you had a change in boost, and then quite possibly a change in temperature. But I don't think that that's going to happen. One more minute. I'm going to go ahead and close out our poll at 70%. The nose keeps sneaking in there. It went down from 80 all the way to 70. You should run a Dominator on your street car. Come on. And it should have nitrous under it. David, I don't know what cylinder head you're talking about. A 202 195 valve. That's a really big exhaust valve. Will a cold side pipe have any effect on turbo response? Very little in my testing. If you made it 50 feet long, it probably would. What do you think about having a simple 12-volt solenoid pull on the throttle cable on downshifts for blipping it? You should be blipping it. That's part of driving. You should be doing a throttle blip. That's part of heel and toe downshifting. You should be doing that, not a little mechanical servo. Trophy 4-cylinder still freaks me out. Yeah, Dave just called me about getting the rings for it. So I think that the machining is done on it. Is a 570 Brawler with vacuum secretary a good place for a go into town stock 289? Yes. I like the Brawler carburetors. I think they work well. Daniel, yours will be the last comment. I have a 96 Chevy 5.7 Vortec. I'm thinking of making a 383 stroker twin turbo. My question is, should I keep it multi-port or go carbureted? Multi-port would be good as long as it's not that spider injection thing. That's going to be problematic. But if it's a Vortec headed deal, 96, it should be. you can run the Mercury Marine one or other EFI manifolds and then blow through that. And on that note, it is time to go. I got to get going. Thank you guys all for showing up. As usual, I will be back tomorrow. And I promise I'm working on a video, trying to get it done. There's so much stuff going on. Just breathe. Thanks, guys. I will see you in the morning.